Howdy do, neighbor. It's Berean Spirits time once again. The boys have gathered around, and they're ready for you. So join in, make comments, and study with the guys as they try to study as the Bereans did in Acts chapter 17. And now, here's the guys.
We are back with another episode of Berean Spirits. My name is Chris Peltz. I'm the evangelist with the Southside Church of Christ here in Springfield, Missouri. And we've got both of the fellows back today. We've got Richard Dodson with the Kearney Church of Christ up in Kearney, Missouri. Rich, you doing good, man?
Yeah, I was here last week. You're the one that's back.
Yeah, well, you know.
We held down the fort.
That's
we
right.
showed up. We are the ones that were slaying the dragons while you were.
I got to play with my grandbaby.
Oh, boy.
That was good. It was a good week. Josh Thornhill with the Westside Church of Christ over in Wichita, Kansas. How you doing, Josh?
I'm good.
Awesome, man.
I'm here.
Yeah. Apparently you were here last week too.
I was.
You guys had an interesting show last week. That was good. But I think today, I'm really looking forward to today's topic. I think we're going to be throwing a lot of information out, some ideas, but maybe some things that might surprise some folks as far as what the scriptures reveal concerning this particular topic. But I'm really looking forward to it, and I think we've got a lot to cover. And so, unless there's just something you guys are chomping at the bit to spit out, I want to jump right into the topic, if that's all right.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah. So we received an email, and there was a question that was asked about the average age for people to get married today as opposed to 30, 40, 50 years ago, and how that age has gone. How that age has gone up for those who were under age 30 as opposed to those who were over age 30. Years ago, the majority of people were getting married before they turned 30, and now it seems as though the majority of people are getting married after age 30. Now, real quick, I want to point out that they, and one of the reasons we're not putting up the poll that I don't think, but a little bit of trouble trying to verify the specific poll that was referenced or mentioned, or the chart, I guess. But there were some things from the government institutes, marriage institutes, and other research and poll places that confirm what the chart was saying as far as the average age today is over 30 for those to get married rather than before age 30. And the question is, why is that? Why? And is there anything in the scriptures that is being affected or could affect that decision on the part of so many today? And I think certainly there are some things that we're going to look at as far as the scriptures are concerned. But guys, we all, I think, have probably a different view or idea, a thought of why people are waiting so much longer to get married. Josh, you've, I think, certainly have some thoughts. I know Richard does as well. I do too. And probably all look at this from a different perspective. But Josh, what are your thoughts on why people are waiting to get married today until, after they're 30 years old?
One of the biggest reasons that comes to my mind immediately, like the first thought, is that young people are getting married later because they're cohabitating instead of getting married. And so they and they eventually do get married. From what I've seen, a lot of these YouTube stars and such that um, end up living together. After a while, they end up getting married, and I don't, and you kind of like, what's the point now? But anyway, they there's a lot of people that they live together, and I've heard people even say that they would suggest that people live together at least a year before they get married, and they're kind of trying it out, or that's just kind of the norm. And with that, we've seen a devaluation of marriage, and so I think that's one of the reasons. Certainly not probably the only reason, but I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing young people getting married at a later time in their life.
One of the interesting things about that aspect of it is the divorce rate for those who live together before getting married is higher than those who get married before living together, which goes indirectly in the face of the very reason many times people say to live together before you get married. But nevertheless, that certainly I think is a contributing factor to all this. Richard, what's one of your thoughts and maybe the main thought you have as far as why this is trending upward as far as the average age of marriage?
Well, that really depends on who you speak to. I mean, every person has a different reason.
Yeah, but I'm asking you.
I know. I'm talking about every individual who's waiting to get married has a different reason. And we're talking about trends per se, but I do want to make mention of the fact that for those who are Christians, it may simply be a lack of opportunity. And, I think that's something that it's sad to say. It's very difficult for Christians to find a Christian mate. And the reason I say that is because, if you are a Christian, you don't want to marry someone who is not going to enhance your service to the Lord. And the Bible actually speaks about seeking someone like that. Now, looking at it from a man's perspective, it says in Proverbs 31 and verse 10, who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies. And so right off the bat, it's questioning, finding this virtuous woman. And then, it talks about her worth is far above rubies. And, Chris, you can dig all the holes you want to in my backyard. You're not going to find any buried treasure. Finding treasure takes a lot of work. And if a virtuous woman, if her value is worth more than that, and the Bible even speaks of the fact that, who can find it, it's going to take some effort to find a woman like that. And of course, that doesn't mean the Lord's not helping, because Proverbs 19 and 14 says a prudent wife is from the Lord. But my point is this, from a Christian's perspective, a Christian may delay marriage just simply for the fact that they have not found someone who is going to enhance their service to the Lord. And that's going to take some searching and some effort because of the fact that not everybody in this world is a Christian. Not every person in this world chooses that. And that kind of muddies the water and makes it a very difficult experience.
And that's something I really want to focus in on quite a bit today, as far as why that is, right? Why is it so difficult? Why is it so hard? And why is it that it seems to be a much more rare virtue or a rare quality, to find. Before we get into that, we need to understand a couple of things. Marriage and the home has always been under attack. I mean, from the very beginning, we see how the devil has been at work to destroy homes, to cause problems when it comes to husbands and wives and children and all of that. So that's been going on for a long time. And to stick with the Proverbs 22, 18 verse 22 says that a man who has found a wife has found a good thing. But Satan and the world and society, and particularly our culture today, says no, it's not necessarily a good thing. And you've got socialists, Marxists, you've got the BLM movement that has been doing its absolute best to destroy God's plan for the home and for marriage. And they've been able to use a few other aspects of things like women's lib. And I think the women's lib movement, I think, has a lot to do, especially as you look at this trend from that era, that time frame when that was really starting until today. I think it really follows along that movement. And so I would throw that in there as far as a reason why that the age is trending up as well. But there's some specifics to that. First of all, let's understand that what age you get married at isn't, that you can't look at the scriptures and say, oh, well, if you're in sin if you don't get married by a certain age. That's not the case at all. In fact, we have passages like 1 Corinthians chapter 7, where Paul is saying, listen, consider what is happening in the world. Consider the situation that you would be facing and the effect that marriage would have on that. And really consider not marrying right now. And so there is a biblical principle in the scriptures, 1 Corinthians 7 specifically, to point out that because of a current distress, because of a certain thing that is happening, that maybe it would be prudent, maybe it would be of good judgment to put off getting married, especially at a younger age, maybe wait a little while. But at the same time, right, there is also a biblical principle for when a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to or cleaves to his wife, right? In the passages we've looked at from Proverbs 18, Proverbs 19, Proverbs 31, that describes and talks about how great and good it is, right? Because it's not good for man to be alone, as we learned from the very beginning. And so with all of that said, there's a lot of teaching that I think is being neglected from the scriptures or perverted because of experiences, because of the women's lib, because of the people accepting various things like socialism, Marxism, and other movements, that their focus is turned away from the family. So I'm going to come back to you, Richard, again. When you look at all of these things, you put all of them together. Is there biblically, a benefit one way or the other that maybe jumps out at you, whether or not you get married at a younger age or waiting until you're a little older?
Well, number one, you got to have opportunity. I mean, there's things that have to be, you just don't find a wife that just find somebody that's female or find somebody that's male if you're a woman and get married. You got to be selective. And so aside from that part, yeah, there are some things. I mean, the scriptures talk about that. If you have found that woman, it's better to marry than to burn. In other words, you may not be able to contain your sexual desires, and it'd be better to marry. So in that case, yes, it is better to marry than to burn. But then on the same hand, the Bible also speaks about in Matthew 19 how some men make themselves eunuchs for the kingdoms of heaven's sake. And I think that's what Paul did. Paul, he could have taken a wife, but he chose not to, for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Someone may choose to do something like that. They don't want to be distracted with the cares of this world. 1 Corinthians 7:32 says that if you do marry someone, that you are going to be, uh, you're going to be thinking a little bit more about the cares of this world, so that you can please your mate.
Mhm.
So those things are something that somebody has to uh, come into play. That's something that we have to think about and understand before we do something like that. But the other things that you were talking about were basically sinful ideas. And I think Josh introduced the cohabitation, and cohabitation is just an outlier for a more serious um, problem, and that's sin. And, and Chris, you're dead right. I mean, the Lord has stated that it's not good for man to be alone, and He made a woman for the man, and that. So that's good. That's something nobody could say is bad. If a man finds a wife, that's a very good thing. And so it's not wrong for a man to seek a wife. It's not wrong for a woman to seek a husband. But what is wrong, I guess you could say, is when we start doing things. Um, oh, I'm trying to remember if Romans 1, it talks about inventors of evil.
Mhm.
And so, there's that's what is that, 28 through 32 talks about inventors of evil. And so sometimes people become of such that they start inventing different ways in which man's can have his um sexual desires fulfilled, such as cohabitation. And a lot of times that's tied into people who are dedicated to, in one sense, you could say, the socialism, who are dedicated to a political ideology. And we shouldn't even be surprised at that. 1 Timothy 4, what does it say? The Spirit said, that in the last days there's going to be those who are going to try to stop people from marrying. So we shouldn't be surprised at that. That's going to be a very that's the world that we live in. And so while we do see a way in which man can find a mate to marry and to do something that the Lord has called good, uh, we also have to understand that we live in a world that is that is vastly inventing evil and trying to oh, I don't know, reinvent the wheel, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. And Josh, when you look at the teaching of our world, our culture, you look at the women's lib, you look at all the things that have been going on in this devaluing of the family, of the home, of marriage as a whole. Sometimes it's not as straightforward as it sounds, because in that women's lib movement, at first it wasn't you don't marry, but the focus was on something other than the home. And I think that goes to I kind of think that's a part of, or a result, consequence of the women's liberation movement. But it seems like they've been focused on training women for anything and everything except for marriage, or except for the home. Is that something that you kind of see happening as well?
Yeah, and it's been happening for over 100 years, well over 100 years. We we've seen some profound shifts in our society, and I think that's what gave birth to that women's lib movement. Because if you look at the pattern of human history, uh, it's only a relatively modern concept that you would leave your home and go out and go to work every day. Work was something that was, usually it would be within around your home, and people would have jobs. Like in the beginnings of our country, you would have lawyers and you would have other kind of professions, but they would work in their homes. They would have places at home that they would work. And if you wanted to go see the lawyer, you'd go to his house and talk to him and discuss the business that you had with him. But then we started seeing a push for work outside of the home. And um, that's why you start seeing a digression in the behavior of men, because they don't have godly influences around them, or they don't have uh, you know, they don't have the accountability of their family there anymore. And they've got a bunch of guys and they can just tell dirty jokes and drink and do all sorts of other stuff. And so we see a digression in the men at that point. And then along with that, you start seeing women doing the same things they've always done and starting to realize that if I don't make money with the work that I'm doing, then it must not be of any value. And that kind of gives birth to the women's lib movement and the feminism movement and such that are going on. I want to suggest that God has created us with a primary focus of building a family. And I think one of the failures of our modern society is that we have become so career oriented, and that's both men and women. And you can do a simple Google search and ask, why are young people waiting to get married anymore? And one of the answers that is given is it's the educational or career goals. I'm placing me, myself, and I, and my progression and my professionalism and my, career aspirations above anybody else. That is a purely selfish mindset to have for men and women. And God didn't create us that way. God didn't create us for us to be so focused on a career. He created us to be a relational being so that we could leave our father and mother and be joined to our wife and to be fruitful and multiply. And that should be the focus of the Christian household, to be able to raise up a family to love and to know God. And instead, like Chris was alluding to as he was sending it over here, there is the emphasis in every other direction, and in turn, that's diminishing the household. And I don't know that was intentional. It may have just been a small decision or a decision that had profound ramifications upon the future of society. And then it may be some people with ulterior motives or some kind of sinister motive started to see some of this and kind of started to use that to their advantage. But at the end of the day, whether it's the career mindedness or all these other focuses that people have, it takes the attention away from where God wanted it. And we've said before on this show, I believe, as the family goes, so goes society.
Mm-hmm.
They've destroyed the family. And so is there any wonder why our society is so broken and messed up anymore?
Yeah.
When we remove God's pattern, it has profound ramifications upon society.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely it does, because too often we're looking for value. We're looking for happiness, joy in other places, in areas in which, where we removed God from our understanding of what is truly joyful or happy. And there is this push for, raise your daughters, you don't need no man, right? You can do everything and anything. And we look at that as, we want to be encouraging. We want to let our daughters know that they can do everything that a man can do, and whether they can or not is not, is really not the issue. Whether they should or not, that is something I think we need to have a discussion about, and understand that, this idea of pursuing career over everything else, that has gotten so bad and so brazen in the minds of young women that they are actually killing their own babies, right, through abortion, because they want to further their career first. They want to do all these other things in this selfishness first. And I think we've not focused enough on the family. We've not emphasized the family enough. You look at a text like Titus chapter 2, for example. In Titus chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, talking about how older women are to teach the younger women to not only love their husbands and love their children, but to be homemakers and to do those things so that there's no reproach brought, against God and against the home, against the church. And what we're doing, and sometimes it is intentional, and I think, Josh, you're right. Sometimes it's a reaction, a knee-jerk reaction, and not to give any names or any specifics, but there are situations, because it's happened multiple times, where I had a friend, once we graduated high school, his dad and mom got a divorce. They were just waiting for them to get out of high school, and get the kids out of the house, and that's happened before. Only it's happened in such a way where here was a woman who was raising kids at home, and now the husband has left. The woman has, she didn't have an education, as far as a higher education, hadn't worked in 20 to 30 years. And now, she's got to take care of herself. And so she, the push is maybe by those kids, I'm not going to be in that situation. I'm not going to find myself in that situation. I'm going to make sure that I and my kids have an education, right, so that we can provide for ourselves, and lose sight of the fact that God intended for there to be a family. Just because one person totally messed it up and put people in a very bad situation and sinned in doing so, there's some knee-jerk responses to that. And then there are the intentional responses where, no, we need to have this sense of independence. I want to be able to do this on my own, and they want to keep everything separate. There's the man's part of things, the woman's part of things. What I make is mine, what you make is yours, and that aspect of it. And then you get to the point, well, why aren't they marrying at a younger age like they used to? And it's because they are establishing a sense of that independence, and only to realize that there's something missing in their life. And that's when ultimately they turn later, in some instances, to wanting to start a family, wanting to get married, and look at that aspect of things. Richard?
I think it comes down to an outlook on life. And one is either has an outlook of a life of service, a life of service to God, or a life of being served. And there are those who are being taught that, you're young once, you need to reach and try to grab as much of the good experiences for yourself while you can before you get older. And that's a pretty wide teaching. And I think what we need to do is to first and foremost understand that the mind frame has to be developed with a relationship with God. I mean, without God, then the want tos doesn't matter. I mean, that's where the mistakes are going to come in. I'll give you an example. We were talking about in our Bible class at church Sunday about mental health. And I made the comment that mental health does not exist without God, because God created man to be in fellowship with him. And if you want to have the mental health that Philippians talks about, you have to have Christ. That's what it talks about, going through Christ. And so to think that you can have mental health without God is just wrong. And I'll give you an example. Go back to the Garden of Eden. You know, the first anxiety happened after sin. They hid from God. They were scared. There's your first case of anxiety. And so, with that as a way of comparing, you know, if things don't work right, if man doesn't work right, if he doesn't function properly without God, then he's not going to function properly in making decisions without God. And so, these things that we're talking about, uh, the problem comes from the fact they do not have God in their life. They are looking to be served rather than to serve. And if we are looking to serve, if that's our choice in life, if our choice in life is to serve God, then it's not going to be a big deal to accept the responsibility of marriage, because that's exactly what that is. The husband serves the wife serves the husband, you know, in their each respective roles, if I can make that clear. But the husband, you know, he serves the wife by leading the family, and the wife, you know, she serves the husband and being his helpmeet. And we see that. And that's what God wanted. That's what he has designed. And so until man accepts that, then the family is going to be disruptive. There's always going to be inventors of evil. There's going to be different things that come up. And right now, what we see, and if I can sum it up, the reason why young people are marrying later is because they are confused.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think it is a symptom, but the problem, and the reason I say it's a symptom, for example, and not to gross anybody, but sweating, right? I mean, somebody sweats a lot, right? Well, that's a symptom of several things. The body uses that to cool the body down, and so just because someone is sweating doesn't mean there's a problem or an issue with the body. The body is functioning the way that it should, but also it can be a symptom of a serious problem like a heart attack, or something else that is going on with the body as a symptom of a serious problem. And so it is a symptom. And so if it's a symptom, what is it a symptom of as far as marriage is concerned and marrying later in life? And I think it can be a symptom of a problem. Like you said, people are confused. Their focus is not upon God and his desire for the family, the desire for the home and the roles that each one plays as far as the man and the woman in the home. Um, or it can be a symptom of the making sure that you do find the right one who can help you, and being picky in the respect that you want to find the one who will help you in your service to God and getting to heaven, rather than just jumping into something rash, and without much thought. And so I think the waiting to marry, for some, it is a symptom. What the issue is really finding out, what is it the symptom for them? Is it a symptom of some other desire and focus away from God, or is it a focus on God? There are those who marry early still, which can be a great thing, but it's it isn't one of the things we can look to and point to and say, listen, if you're going to marry, you need to do it early, or if you're going to marry, you need to do it later in life. Um, what you've got to do, and what we've got to do as preachers, evangelists, as members of the Lord's church and local congregations, is we've got to emphasize the home, the role that each one plays in the home, the role that we play as husbands, as wives, as mothers, as fathers, and focusing upon eternity rather than making sure that we're climbing corporate ladders, making sure that we are, everything is, all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed financially, in the respect that that's our focus rather than having a focus upon God more than anything else. And I think Titus chapter 2 is a great example of that, where the older women aren't teaching younger women about careers as far as outside the home. They're not teaching younger women about making sure that they've gotten themselves established in outside of a home in a workplace, but rather to love their husbands, love their children, and to be the homemakers. To not that it's wrong to work outside the home, not at all. We see that with Lydia in Acts 16, and the virtuous woman in Proverbs 31 worked outside the home. That's not an issue. That's not the problem. The problem is whether or not that is put before everything else. That's put before God and put before God's plan for a family, and the role of a husband and the role of a wife.
And let's if I hang on, Josh. If I can add, I'll forget, Josh. I'm older than you, so I got to say it now. So forgive my indulgence, but
I'll respect my elders.
Chris got me fired up here. If a person accepts the fact that serving God can be accomplished in many ways, but one of the finest ways you can serve God, for a woman example, is to be a virtuous wife of a man and try to help him in his service to God. Maybe you can help him become an elder someday, or maybe you can help him just be a teacher. It doesn't really matter, but you can aid him. And then also, you can also bring children into this world or adopt them. But either way, you're going to be teaching these children to be servants of God. Now, that's no guarantee that they will, but needless to say, you can be teaching them and giving them the strong basis they need in a home environment that God wants. And so, that's a way that you can serve God. And the husband, when you're out there working, not everybody has a job that they like, but you realize you're working to try to provide for your family, for your children, and these types of things are being accomplished. Hey, that's a good thing. That is a life of service. And if we leave people with anything else here today, a life of service is more fulfilling than a life of self gratification.
Go ahead, Josh.
Now I'm part of the millennial generation, and I know Gen Z is the one that immediately follows. But what I've heard a couple of things over the past couple of years, particularly about Gen Z, that they're seeing a lot of things from the previous generations, and they're pushing back on them. And that just sounds like they're being rebellious, but the kind of things they're pushing back on are kind of good.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that young people like the millennials and the Gen Zs are pushing back on the use of credit cards and debt because they see the destruction that it's done. I've heard of Gen Z kind of pushing back against the super tight, immodest workout wear, and in favor of looser fitting clothing. Those are some good things. But one of the things that you see in these searches when you ask why people are getting married later is a fear of divorce. Chris mentioned his friend or friends who, as soon as they graduated high school, their parents divorced. Kids have seen the destruction of divorce because we live in a society that almost glorifies the single parent household. I mean, and it's a sad reality that's become so normal, because it's not the way that God created us to be. That's not what we're better off being. And so we've seen parents or children who have seen the destruction that divorce does, and they're fearful of it. And so they wait to get married because they don't want to put themselves in a position that is going to lead to the same end. Now, a couple of things that I want to say to that. Just cohabitating is not the answer.
Mhm.
And I think the reality is that is undermining. If somebody's truly not wanting to get married because of the fear of the divorce, and yet they're going to cohabitate, they're undermining their position. Because we're going to play house and we're going to build a family without the commitment of marriage. And so, yeah, it's not divorce, but that breakup can still happen. And so you're still creating or raising children in a unstable household. And so it's not accomplishing what people want it to accomplish. And so, again, if we go back to what God has designed for marriage, God says that you do not have the right to divorce your spouse, except in the case where they are unfaithful. Otherwise, what God has joined together, let not man separate. And when both people have that kind of a mindset entering into this relationship, you're going to find ways to make it work. I've heard stories from, couples who were married for 65 years. That's a very rarity anymore, but people say, ask them, so what did you do? How did you do that? And, the answer that's usually given is, well, we were raised in a generation where if something was broke, you fixed it. You didn't throw it away and get a new one. And that's the commitment of marriage that God is calling upon us to make. It is, you are joining yourself together for life to this person. And, I knew of a preacher, I studied with him a few years ago, and he was not a Christian when he and his wife got married. They were not Christians. And he admitted to me that when they got married, he was just of the mindset that, if it doesn't work out, we'll just divorce. It'll be all right. Now he's learned, kind of become appalled at his mindset at the time. But marriage is a commitment. And we can't, and like you've already pointed out, cohabitating kind of leads to more of the divorce and such. It leads
Yeah.
to more of the issues that people are fearful of. And so, you know, I'm sure you guys both have grown up. Well, maybe, but as you've grown up and especially started families of your own, you started to look back at things that your parents said that maybe didn't make quite as much sense to you. But then now that you have your own children, you're like, oh, I understand it now.
Mhm.
When we start seeing that with God's plan, God's purpose, we understand why God said what he did. Then we see the benefit that it has for us. We see why God said what he did, because it works better. Our society is broken, and emphasizing the family and having strong, solid, godly families will not destroy society. It will only strengthen it. And so we need to emphasize the importance of the family and our roles in the family and the commitment of marriage. And that's the only way we're really going to find a big difference in this culture.
Yeah. And the fact that it's a good thing, right? I mean, that's the battle that we're fighting against the world. They're not looking at this as, this is something you can do later after all the good is done. And Richard, you and I had a conversation earlier this week about folks telling their kids, go out and have all the fun you can now before you get married. And that's, that kind of goes to this, what we're talking about, in the respect that marriage isn't looked at as that good and great thing. It's what you do after all the good and great stuff is over and done. And that's where society and culture has deceived us, and where God has been set out of the picture, rather than understanding just how good and great marriage truly is, and the role that we have and responsibility that we have in such a great relationship, with marriage. And I think in doing so, maybe we'll start seeing this kind of reverse this trend. Maybe not. Whether or not it's a good or bad thing, yeah, it can be, and not necessarily. So, not to kind of leave on a non-answer, but it really comes back to, where is our focus? If your focus is on God, and that means that it's going to take you longer, then that's fine. If our focus is not on God, then whether you get married early or not, there's a problem, right? Because you're not focused upon God. And we need to start having more in-depth and meaningful teaching about the greatness of God's plan for the home, for husbands and wives, and the family as a whole. Richard, you got any last thoughts for us today?
No.
Huh?
Well, I'm just saying, I was sitting while you were talking, I was thinking about how many people divorce today based on, because they're not being gratified. They're not receiving the self gratification. And again, I just think it all comes down to a life of service versus self gratification. What do you choose to do? And we got too many people today who have chosen self gratification based upon a lie, but they're choosing that. And that's the part I think that we really need to voice. That's the part we need to proclaim, is that a life of service is far better than a life of self gratification.
Even Jesus said he did not come to be served, but to serve. Yeah. Josh, last thoughts?
Well, I just want to say that our society is feeding us lies, and our society is feeding us lies because our society is doing the work of Satan. And so we want to recognize the truth. We want to recognize what God has said, because it's for our benefit. It's for our good. And just go about trying to follow the pattern in every respect of that God has given us, and things will work out well.
Yeah. Understanding the importance and value of the home, as you pointed out, Josh, and we've said many times, as the home goes, so does society, and so does the church, for that matter. And so, emphasizing the home and the good and the godly aspects of it, I think, are important, and I think that'll help everyone make the right decision, regardless of their age. Folks, we appreciate everybody tuning in, listening to Berean Spirits. We appreciate those who send in thoughts, questions, recommendations for programs. The email is bereanspirits@gmail.com. If you have another thought or something you want to add to this discussion, we can continue that as well through the email, or another program also. Until next time, though, remember to search the scriptures with Berean Spirits.
Well, folks, that's all for today. Don't worry. Lord willing, the guys will be back next week for another Bible study on Berean Spirits. Until then, let the guys hear from you. Drop them some email at bereanspirits@gmail.com. They'd love to hear from you. Until next time, let's keep studying that Bible.